Continuing Chapter 5 of Parzival, The Lost Night. Wild Mountain itself was not to be found. Another winter came. He and the warhorse slept close together, each body saving the other from a freezing death. Food was scarce for man and beast, and hope more meager yet. The sun rose, the sun set, but there was no counting of the days. The world seemed a cold and endless wilderness. A man might ride forever and never come out into the sunlight or into sight of a great castle that refused to show its face. So it was that on one of these nameless days, Parzival was riding to nowhere. There was a light snowfall, and Parzival in his cold armor sat shivering in the saddle. He saw coming toward him through the woods a gray-bearded man, followed by his wife and 2 young daughters. They were dressed in sackcloth, and their feet, despite the weather, were bare. Parzival greeted the family with due courtesy, for their bearing was noble, if not their attire. The old man greeted him in return, but with a rebuke. "I see, sir, you are a knight. Why is it, then, you do not observe this holy season? Why, in God's holy name, do you ride armed, when you should indeed be walking barefoot?" "There was a time," Parzival answered, "that I knew the name of one called God. I even vowed him my service, but in return this God gave me nothing but sorrow, so I do not look for help from that source any more." "Do we speak of the same God?" the pilgrim asked. "Do you mean the one who came to earth, born of a virgin? Do you mean he who died for our sins upon the dreadful cross on this very day? Do you mean the God who gave his life that all might live?" Parzival did not answer. "Follow us," the pilgrim said. The pilgrim said this gently, so I will say it gently. "Follow us," the pilgrim said gently. "There is a holy man not far from here. To him you can confess your misdeeds, and he will help you find forgiveness." The daughters were, to tell the truth, more interested in Parzival's handsome face than his sins. They persuaded their father that they should share their food with the knight, and urged their parents to find a place where the poor fellow might warm himself. But Parzival thought, "It will not do for me to go with these good folk. I no longer serve the God to whom they are devoted." So he thanked the pilgrims for their kindness and went on his unknown way. Now, though his mind was churning and his frozen heart began to break up like river ice in the thaw of spring, he recalled from his distant childhood echoes of his mother's teachings and began to wonder, who was it hung the stars and spread out the earth? Was it indeed the one called God? If such a one was powerful enough to create all things, might he not be able to grant comfort to a sorrowing soul? "Oh God, if you can help," Parzival cried out to the dark forest. "If you can help, then help me now." There was no answer from the silent trees, but in the stillness Parzival felt a tiny stir of hope. "If," he said to himself, "if God is so great, then he has the power to guide both men and beast. If he wishes to help me, he will guide my horse to find such help. Now," he said, throwing the reins over the horse's ears. Go where God chooses." With that, he spurred his horse into a gallop. Within minutes, the war-horse of Wild Mountain had borne him to the mouth of a cave, where there dwelt a holy man, a hermit, named Trevisant. When the good man heard Parzival's greeting, he came out. "Pshaw!" he said at once. "Has some desperate encounter forced you into armor on this holy Good Friday? Dismount, if you will." Parzival did so, and then he told the hermit how his horse had brought him there, and added, "Sir, if you can guide me, for I am a sinner." "Tether your horse to yonder tree, then come with me, for I can see that you are bitter cold." How good it felt to take off that icy steel and warm his limbs before the fire. There was no wine or meat or bread in that cave, but kindness makes a feast. When Parzival had warmed, the hermit said, "Tell me, my son, why have you come to me?" "There was a time," Parzival said, "when my life was full of joy. I vowed to serve one called God, but he is the grandfather of all my troubles. It is said that God will help, but where was his help for me? He has given me nothing but sorrow." In his anger, Parzival stood up. He began to pace back and forth before the hermit's fire. The hermit sighed. "First, sit you down," he said. "I would that you could trust God, for he can help us both. He it is that both made the world and saves it by his grace. The angel Lucifer rebelled against God, and then again the first man that he made, but God is lover yet of all, and will, I know, be your true help. First, my son, tell me why you have such anger against him. My greatest sorrow is for the Grail, Parzival said, and then for my wife. I long for them both. It is fitting that a man should long for his wife, the hermit said. But it alarms me that you long for the Grail. That is arrogance itself. Don't you know that no man approaches the Grail of his own will, but only the Grail bids to but only that he that the Grail bids to come? I know this, because with these eyes I have seen that holy thing. You were there in the presence of the Grail? Parzival asked. I was, the hermit replied. But Parzival could not bring himself to say that he too had seen the Grail. I do not boast, the hermit continued, for it was not by my deserving that I saw the Grail, but by God's grace. Guard against pride, my son. Trevisan stirred the embers so that they danced up. He seemed not to see the pain in Parzival's eyes. I shall tell you an unhappy tale of pride. There is a king called Anfortas whose pride has brought him to the most terrible agony. In his youth he pursued vain honour and the admiration of pretty ladies, but things are not in accord with the Grail. These things are not in accord with the Grail. Now he lies there at Wild Mountain, guarded by the Knights of the Grail, who do not let anyone enter there except... The hermit sighed. One callow youth, and for him it would have been better if he had not come. He failed to ask about the king's wound, and so rode away, bound in sin. He turned now to look Parzival in the face. But I digress. Anfortas was the son and heir to that castle, but he was not content to follow the direction of the Grail. One of the castle knights had met his death at a joust, and lost his armour and war-horse. Thereby, to a knight named Lahalin. His eyes narrowed. Your name is not Lahalin, is it? I ask because I saw your horse's saddle, and the sign of the turtle dove, which is the emblem of the Knights of Wild Mountain. No, Parzival answered. I am the son of a man who died in battle. I beg you remember him in your prayers. His name was Gameret. I am not Lahalin. I never stripped a corpse but once, when I was a green youth who knew no better. I should confess this crime to you. I slew Sir Ither, the Red Knight, with a javelin. When he was stretched out dead, I took from him his armour, his weapons, and his horse. Then you are Parzival, the hermit said. Alas, poor nephew, you have sinned more than you know, for you are blood kin to Ither, whose blood you have shed, and more than that, my dear sister Herozyde has died for sorrow that you left her side. Don't tell me that, Parzival cried. If you are my uncle, tell me in truth. Tell me that I have not killed both my husband and my mother. I cannot lie, the holy man said. You broke my sister's heart when you left. Another sister, the mother of that unfortunate Sagoon, died at her daughter's birth. Our youngest and last remaining sister serves as mistress in Wild Mountain, where my poor brother is king, but has no joy in that title. Your grandfather, King Frimoter, died when we were young, and my brother Anfortas became his heir, but when first bristles appeared at his cheek, he sought out many loves and bold adventure, careless of the life that must be lived by one who is protector of the Grail. A heathen king approached, determined to win the Grail for himself, and Anfortas, arrayed in pride, rode out to joust with him. The heathen king was slain, but my brother carried back to Wild Mountain the point of that infidel's lance, and part of the shaft buried in his side. He was so pale we thought he would surely die, but the physician probed deep into the wound until he drew out both lance point and bamboo shaft. In gratitude I gave up all knightly honour on that day and gave myself to God. Who will be the protector of the Grail, they asked, for my brother's wound had festered, but I did not believe that God would let him die. We carried him to the presence of the Grail, and indeed he did not die, but his continued life proved affliction greater than death would ever be. We sent to every part of the world for herbs and balms and antidotes, but there was nothing found that could ease his pain. At last we fell down before the Grail on our knees and asked for some sign that his agony would have an end. We were directed to a certain ancient writing. A knight would come, it said, and ask the question, and all our sorrow would be ended, but no one, man, woman, or child, was to prompt the knight. He must ask the question out of his own compassion, or else it would prove harmful to the king, causing him pain more terrible than before. If the knight should fail to ask the question, then so would fail his power to heal. But if he should ask the question, then the same night would become king, and all sorrow would cease, and Fortis would be healed, and he would be king no more. For a long time the hermit was silent, but Parzival could not speak. We waited, the hermit continued, for the coming of this good knight. We nursed my poor brother's wound as best we could, though nothing eased the pain. At times the stench from the wound grew so terrible that we would carry him down to the lake, so that the wind would carry away the odor. Those who saw them there thought he had come to fish. It was from this that people came to call him the Angler. After several years I left Wild Mountain, and I came to this place to pray that the night would hasten. My prayer was heard. A night did come, the one I told you of earlier. Would to God he had left my prayer unanswered. This night was led to the castle. He saw my brother in his agony, and he did not ask the question. He left in shame. The hermit got to his feet. Enough of these sad tales, he said. We must find nourishment for you and your poor horse. It is too bad that snow lies so late upon the ground. I have none of the fodder of Wild Mountain to offer, nor its rich foods. We shall have to gather bracken and yew tips to feed your mount and dig roots for our own supper. After prayers they ate the humble supper the hermit had prepared. Nephew, he said, pray do not despise this food. I have never tasted better, Parzival answered. They went out to where the horse was tied. The good man stroked his nose. I apologize, my friend, he said to the horse, for your poor meal. If you were at home in Wild Mountain where you belong, you would be feasting now. At this, Parzival could hold back his secret no longer. Dear uncle, I have come to you in my extremity, and you have received me with all kindness. Please, I beg you, do not cast me out now, or I will be completely without hope. I swear to you that I was wholly without evil intent, but that man who rode to Wild Mountain, who saw the Grail and the sorrow, and who still asked no question, I was that man. The hermit was unable to contain his grief. What are you saying? Well, were the 5 senses God gave you? How can you be in the presence of Anne Fortis's agony and not cry out in compassion? Parzival covered his face and began to weep. There is no hope for me. I have killed kinsman and mother and failed the quest ordained by God. I curse the day my mother brought me into the light. Do not despair, my son, the hermit said gently, laying his hand on Parzival's shoulder. Though every human voice should curse you, and every human heart should harden itself against you, the mercy of God knows no bounds. God himself will not abandon you. Then Trevisan drew the grieving Parzival back into the cave and gently urged him to do penance for his wrongdoing and put his trust once more in God, who creates and saves. But still, nephew, he said, you have not told me how you come to be riding a horse from Wild Mountain. I pray that upon your other sins you have not stolen something that belongs to the Grail. So Parzival told him about the joust with the knight from Wild Mountain. You did not kill a knight from that castle. No, uncle, I saw him safely away, but my own poor horse lay dead, and this war horse I won by fair battle. His uncle was content. For a week or more Parzival stayed there with Trevisan, learning more of the mercy of God and the depths of his love. He was happy to share the roots and herbs that the hermit ate. He still did not know the way to Wild Mountain when he rode forth from the holy cave, but his heart was cleansed and full of hope. And that's the end of chapter 5.